Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine, and welcome if this is your first episode. So glad you're here. You may not know this about me, even those who have been listening for a while, but I am also a wine educator, which means I host private tastings both virtually and in person here around the Seattle area. It is absolutely one of my favorite things to do. As much as I love talking to you via this podcast, it's a great opportunity for me to reach more of you. But the private tastings are just something special. I think wine has this cool ability to bring people together and create these connections. And so getting to host these tastings and create these connections is so cool and one of my favorite things. So I've hosted many wine tastings over the, 3.5 years that Cork and Fizz has been a thing, a business, my thing. And during those tastings, I've noticed some of the same questions popping up over and over. And don't get me wrong, I love answering these questions every time they come up during my wine tastings. If you don't know this about me, I'm a questioner myself. There's a personality quiz out there called Gretchen Rubin's 4 Tendencies. And now, I'm not going to go into a whole spiel. I'm actually a personality quiz doubter. I don't really believe in a lot of the Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, all of those kinds of things. But Gretchen Rubin's 4 Tendencies, it hits home for me. There's an obliger, a questioner, a rebel, and an upholder. And I am 100%, without a doubt, a questioner. And if you're ever curious, you just ask my poor parents, who always had to tell me why I needed to do something before I would do it. So I understand the need to have questions answered, and that like when your brain works via questions. So all that to say, I love asking questions and I love answering your questions. So please keep asking me all of your wine questions. And if I don't know the answer, I will tell you, and then I will go figure it out. So I thought it would be fun for this episode to gather some of those most common questions I get and put them in a podcast, because chances are, if even just one person has asked me these questions, then it's likely that multiple people were thinking this question in their head and maybe a little too afraid to ask or not sure how to ask. So let's dive into these top 10 questions that I get asked during my private wine tastings. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. Okay, jumping right in with the first question, and this is most definitely the number one question that I get asked during my wine tastings. Now, just to kind of give you an idea and kind of picture here. So during these wine tastings, I typically lead people through 3 to 4 different wines, and I teach you a little bit about the wine. I teach you about how wine is made. Depending on the theme, I'll tell you a little bit about maybe where the wine is from or who made the wine. And then we go into this just in-depth wine tasting experience. And it's actually, we follow that same tasting experience that I go through in an earlier episode of just how to taste wine. I think it's like the 4 steps to wine tasting. So you can learn the exact same process, but we do it during a private tasting, and I lead people through this. So we look at the wine, we smell the wine and decipher some aromas. We figure out its structure, its acidity, its alcohol, its tannin level. And then we talk about whether we like it or not. And as we're doing this tasting process, and usually on the very first one of the biggest questions I get is, so what is the right answer? And this almost always comes up during the aromas, like when we are smelling the wine. And everybody's just like, I'm asking them, what do you smell? What do you think? Lemon or pineapple, right? Is there any apple in there? Is there any vanilla or, grass? Or, and we go through all this and people say some things, but then there's always at least one person, and I would totally be this person too. If I was new to the world of wine, I'd be like, so what's the right answer, right? Like what's the thing that I should be saying? And here's the thing. There is no right answer, and there's no wrong answer either when tasting wine. And I get it that you might hate that I'm saying that. You might hate the fact that I'm like, sorry, there is no right answer. And I promise I am not that person who is just like, I grew up as a millennial and, the whole like, there can't be losers. Like, here's your participation medal. That is not what I'm being right now. Okay. I mean, as a kid, my favorite subject in school was math. Why? Because it always had a clear right answer. I love things that have a clear right answer. I mean, there's no debating that 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's simple. And my least favorite was English because there were so many different interpretations to a book that we were reading. And when a teacher tried to say that one interpretation was wrong, I didn't believe them. There was no way that they could know. There was no clear black and white right or wrong answer. So you're probably wondering, why do I like wine tasting so much if there isn't a right answer then? But here's the thing, no one claims there is one. I'm never going to be that English teacher who says your interpretation of the wine is wrong, because it's not. It can't possibly be. And sure, there are tests when it comes to becoming a professional sommelier. And when there are tests, they're obviously right or wrong. But even then, it's more about a test figuring out what the wine is. Most of the time at my tastings, we know what the wine is. Unless, of course, it's a blind tasting, but then we're doing it more as a game and not as a test, because nobody takes tests in their free time. And listen, my tastings just simply aren't for professional sommeliers. They're fun experiences for trying something new. So there is not a right answer. And listen, I could tell you what I smell and taste in the wine, but those aren't the correct answers either. Those are my aromas and what I taste in the wine. Everyone can have totally different answers when it comes to what you smell and taste in wine. And this is actually backed up by science, because here's the thing. Your sense of smell and taste are very closely connected to your memories and your past experiences. And everybody has different memories and different past experiences. One scientific explanation of this actually points at how odors are processed. So buckle in, we're going to go a little sciencey, a little fancy here, but stick around. It makes sense. I think it'll help you with understanding why I'm saying there's no right answer. So, first, scent molecules are sniffed into our nose, and they make contact with our olfactory receptors, which are located high up in the nasal cavity behind the bridge of your nose. The scent molecules bind to those olfactory receptors, right? They're in the nasal cavity behind the bridge of your nose, those olfactory receptors, in a specific pattern. And once that pattern is formed, that signal is then sent to the brain, where it is processed first by the primary olfactory cortex. Now, unlike any other senses, those scent molecules, that signal which comes from those receptors, bypasses what's called the thalamus. Many people consider this the gatekeeper of sorts. So any other sense, when they have a signal, it goes straight to the thalamus, then it goes to your brain. Scents bypass that. And so they can attach to a memory without you even trying, because they went straight back into your brain. Another cool scientific explanation, the olfactory area, the part of the brain that processes odors, is very close in proximity to the part of the brain that handles emotional memories. If you want to get fancy with it, that's called the hippocampus and the amygdala. For our ancestors, this allowed them to immediately smell danger or know when a food source was nearby, because they had certain emotions behind a smell that was familiar. For us, this comes up most often as it gives us that warm, fuzzy feeling when we smell like pine needles and cranberries, right? For me, that reminds me of Christmas morning. You might have other smells that just give you like these really lovely feelings because you actually connected that aroma with a memory. So all that to say, it is actually scientifically proven that you are going to smell and taste different things. Remember, taste is closely connected to smell, which is why that is also based off experience, because we each have different memories and past experiences. So, when we are tasting wine, there is no right or wrong answer. And science is saying that, not just me trying to be nice. Okay, question number 2. How do you choose the wines for the tastings? Well, first, it starts with you telling me what you want to taste. When you book a wine tasting, you have the option of selecting one of my existing themes. I have quite a few at this point. I've gathered them up. Or creating your own. You can do something totally, choose your own adventure style. And beyond that, you also let me know what wines you definitely don't want. You'll notice when you fill out the form, it always instead of asking, what wines would you like me to include? I say, what don't you want me to include? I think this works way better. It gives me some freedom, but it also makes sure I don't pick something you definitely don't want. You'll also note in the form where you'd like to shop for the wines and the price range that you'd like to stay between. So, once I have all that information, if you've chosen a pre-existing theme, the wines are determined by that theme. So, for example, in my Wines of Italy class, I typically recommend Friulano from Friuli, or a Pinot Grigio if you can't find Friulano, a Nebbiolo from Piedmont, and a Chianti from Tuscany. That said, there's always flexibility based on your preferences, what you want to learn about, and your price range, of course. And for my Washington wines class, I switch it up a lot more often just because I really enjoy learning about all the different Washington wines. But I always like to have a Washington Syrah because honestly, I love it. And I think it's what Washington should be known as. So if there's anything I can do as Cork and Fizz to make Washington Syrah way more popular and what people think of when they think of Washington wine, I'm going to do it and I'm going to include it in the wine class, unless, of course, you say I would not like any red wines and we'll find something else. Now, if you have a custom theme, I'll work with you to find the wines to fit that theme. So, overall, some of the things that I keep in mind when choosing the wines is, have I tried it before? A lot of times I like to bring in wines that I've had so I know for sure it is a good quality wine. If I haven't had it before, is it a reliable producer, right? Have I had a different one of their wines and I know they make good wine? I can trust that wine. Is it a little off the beaten path? Something unique and fun. This is something that I try really hard to do. Maybe it's just me, but when I do, one of these special experiences, I don't want just your typical Sauvignon Blanc or Cabernet Sauvignon. I would love to be given something that's a little different, a little more unique, something I might not have reached for or known about, and something new that I can learn about. Another question I ask, is it worth the price? A lot of times I like to introduce people, even when you have a lower price range, hey, you've got a price range $20 and under. I'm going to give you the best bang for your buck in that price range because I want to show you that you do not need to spend a ton of money on wine. Now, I did do a tasting where they're like, hey, $50 per bottle is your budget. And I was like, "Wah." I had a lot of fun with that, but I also still like some of the wines I chose for that. $20 to $30. I didn't need to go too high up in the price range to find something really delicious, and they loved every wine that we talked about. And of course, the other thing that I think about when choosing wines for a tasting is, does the bottle tell a story? I love wine for the stories behind the wine. I mean, the wine tastes delicious too, that helps. But if I'm choosing between 3 different wines, if there's one that has a special story behind the bottle, I'm going to bring that one. I mean, there's one that I brought recently. I did a Wines of Washington tasting for these folks, and I brought I can't remember what the bottle was. And honestly, I'm drawing a blank at what the name of the producer was. But I brought this bottle. I'm picturing the label in my mind right now, trying to come up with it. Okay, I had to pause this quick because I needed to look up the name of this wine. Again, I chose this wine, so it's by Otis Kenyon is the name of the producer of these wines, because I'd gone to the tasting room recently and heard the story behind the name of the wine. But I won't tell you the whole story now because this will be too long of a podcast. But just know that the way that I found the name of this and the memory of it, I looked up Woodinville Winery, named after arsonist dentist. So if that tells you anything and you want to learn more about this story, feel free to message me and I'll tell you all about it. But I chose that wine over another Washington red wine or whatever that we had because it had such a unique story behind it. I just think that's so cool. Okay, question number 3. This podcast is sponsored by VoChill. When you're enjoying a glass of wine, temperature matters, and you don't need to be a wine expert to know this. You know this the minute you realize you forgot to put the bottle of wine in the fridge, and now you're stuck with lukewarm Sauvignon Blanc that is the opposite of refreshing. You know adding ice cubes will just water the wine down, but it seems like it's your only option. Not anymore. I want to introduce you to one of my favorite wine gadgets, VoChill. This gadget is as simple as it is elegant. It will keep wine perfectly chilled in your own wine glass. No more clunky metal or plastic tumblers or ice in your wine. While this gadget is an absolute must during the summer months, I don't enjoy wine without it from June to September. It's also incredibly useful for those days when you're craving a glass of white or rosé, but you don't want to wait for the bottle to chill in the fridge. VoChill offers a stemmed and stemless chiller in multiple colors, so you're bound to find one that's perfect for you. They also make the perfect gift. I should know, I got one for my mom at Christmas a couple years ago, and she loves it. Head to vochill.com, that's VOCHILL.com, to get your perfect wine chiller, and don't forget to use code CORKANDFIZZ for 15% off your order. This podcast is sponsored by the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club. Interested in trying new wines, but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you love the idea of tasting wine live with me. If that's you, come join my Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club, and you'll get to sip wine with me twice a month while I help you find new favorite wines. The Cork Crew is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. And the best part about this club, purchasing the wine is completely optional. Plus, all events are recorded, and you have access to the full library of recordings as a Cork Crew member, so you can always catch up if you can't make it live. Oh, and did I mention it's virtual, which means you get to do all of this from the comfort of your sofa in your PJs. No need to worry about driving in crappy traffic, finding a designated driver, or spending an arm and a leg on a taxi. Want to give it a try without the commitment? You're in luck. Right now, I'm offering a free class pass to anybody who wants to try out the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Tasting Club. With this pass, you'll be able to join a Cork Crew event of your choosing. No strings attached. I don't need your credit card. I don't need you to sign up for anything. You'll be my guest. Simply head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to get your class pass and be one step closer to becoming a member of the best wine tasting club around, the Cork Crew. I can't wait to see you there. Now let's get back to the show. Why do we smell the wine before we taste it? Now, this one goes back to science as well. Human beings can only distinguish about 5 major tastes, right? It's like the sweet, umami, acidic, bitter, right? Something like that. I don't have them memorized. But humans can distinguish more than 1 trillion scents. Like, if we studied and we focused and we learned all these, we can distinguish between all these different scents. So, if we only focused on tasting the wine, we'd miss out on so much flavor. And you can discover this for yourself. So, next time that you're sipping wine, plug your nose when you take a sip of the wine and don't unplug your nose until you've swallowed the wine. You'll notice it just doesn't have a lot of flavor. It might just kind of taste like alcohol. So, we smell the wine to discover more about it than we simply could by tasting it. Another less scientific reason, but I think this is a great reason, is that it forces us to slow down and focus on a sense that is not often used. It challenges you. I mean, like, when else are you asked to smell something and try to put a name to it, right? Any other time you're just asked, like, does it smell good? Does it smell bad? How many times do you actually go, what does this smell like, right? That, to me, is why we smell wines before we taste them. Okay, here's another common one that comes up and in different forms of this question, but essentially, do the legs of the wine mean anything? So, short answer, yes. Long answer, probably not what you think it means. It's a common myth that the legs of a wine tell you the quality of the wine. You've likely heard someone say, or maybe heard it in a movie, this wine has great legs. In all honesty, I have no idea what great legs are. Because the legs of a wine don't tell you anything about the quality. There doesn't exist good or bad legs. And if you're listening to this and you're like, hold up, Haley, what the hell are legs of a wine? Like, this wine is not an animal. This wine does what are legs? Legs, which are also called tears of a wine, are the droplets of wine that form on the inside of a wine glass. So either after you've swirled the glass or you took a sip and you set the glass down and you see those droplets on the inside of the glass going back into the wine, those are your legs. And like I said, they're also called tears. So what do they actually mean? They can hint to the alcohol and or sweetness level in the wine. If there is a higher density of droplets, aka there are more droplets, it's likely that the wine has higher alcohol levels. If the droplets move slowly down the glass, there's likely more sugar content in the wine. So that is what the legs of the wine tell you. All right, here's another very popular one. Why do I get headaches after I drink X wine, where X is, either a red wine, or why do I get headaches after I drink a sparkling wine? And this is one of those questions that is honestly pretty impossible to answer, especially because I am not a doctor. But I can share some options that are possible and also bust some myths about what it's not. So here are some things that it could be. First one, you're dehydrated. You're likely not drinking enough water while you're drinking wine. Honestly, happens to the best of us, right? Like, you really have to be diligent about having, my best tip is like having a glass of water in between each glass of wine and just making sure you stay hydrated. It could also be that you're intolerant to the histamines in wine. This is especially possible if it's usually red wines that give you a headache. So, histamines are the things that cause allergies. They also occur naturally in wine. Now, in a white wine, you'll have 3 to 120 micrograms per liter. Sparkling wine, 15 to 670 micrograms per liter. A red wine, 60 to 3,800 micrograms per liter. So this is why I say if you get headaches more so when you drink red wine, it could be the histamines. This is also more likely if you have allergies. And the one thing that I have read, again, I am not a doctor. Please do not take this as medical advice. But the one thing I've read is that you could try taking an allergy pill before drinking the wine. And if that helps avoid the headaches, then that tells you that it was most likely the histamines. It could also be that your body can't handle tannins. Again, this one's most common for red wine. When digested, tannins can disable enzymes in your body, which in turn can release serotonin in your brain. And for some people, this can cause excruciating headaches. Again, this is not super common, but if you do notice it's primarily like it only happens with red wines and not whites, it could potentially be the tannins. And lastly, it could be the high level of sugar and or chemicals in some cheaper wine. So if you notice when you buy wine from the grocery store, you tend to have a headache after that versus when you go to a winery or when you go to a small wine shop and get a little bit more expensive bottle or higher quality bottle, I should say, then it is potentially those sugars and those chemicals. Now, what it's likely not, it's very unlikely that it's sulfites. I know you probably don't want to hear it. That's what every wine bottle says contains sulfites because there is about 1% of the population that is allergic to sulfites. So they need to label it because there's enough sulfites in the wine that it is dangerous to those people who are allergic to it. But that's the thing, only 1% of the population is allergic to sulfites. And you likely aren't allergic if you can eat dried fruit, maple syrup, canned vegetables, jam. Sulfites occur in a lot of things. So if you don't notice headaches with those, it is likely not the sulfites. All right, moving on to our next question. Does price really matter when buying a bottle of wine? How much better is a $100 bottle versus like a $20 bottle? I've actually done a wine tasting, like a wine tasting experience for people where we tried different prices. It was a sparkling wine theme, and we did 3 different bottles of sparkling wine. I think we did like a $10 cava, a $25 Cremant, and a $100 bottle of champagne. And to kind of give you a hint of what the answer to this question is, many people couldn't tell the difference. They could tell that they were different kinds of wine, but they couldn't necessarily say that one bottle felt more expensive than another, or like one glass felt more expensive when they were doing the blind tasting between the three. And so sometimes, $20 bottle is a lot different than a $100 bottle, but not always. And there are a lot of factors that go into that. And I actually talk about this in length in one of my previous episodes, The Cost of Wine, episode 48. So go check that out if you want to learn more. But just like a short little preview of that episode, I honestly, my own opinion, I truly think that once a wine gets upward of like $50 or so, you shouldn't notice a huge difference in blind tasting those wines. So $50 versus a $100 bottle of wine. But that doesn't mean that the higher price is invalid, right? You're like, okay, if there's no like blind taste difference between 50 and 100, why would I buy that bottle of $100 wine? So there are a couple of things to take into account here with that higher price. Potentially supply and demand. Maybe they made fewer bottles of this one, or there's a high demand for it. Maybe the time that it took to make the wine. Maybe this wine was aged in oak for 5 years and then aged in a bottle for another 10 years. And then what about the talent that went into making the wine? Maybe this is a well-known, top-notch winemaker, and so you have to pay a little bit more to try their wine. All of those things are important and they don't show up in a blind tasting of the wine. So that's where pricing doesn't, to me, only matter on the taste. It's also about, maybe they made the wine in a completely sustainable way, which I think is something that's super important. And I'm trying to pay more attention to in the bottles of wine that I try. That does mean that the cost is going to be a little higher. So that was just a short little preview. But if you want to learn more about that, check out the Cost of Wine episode number 48 on the podcast. All right, next up, we didn't finish all the wine. How should I save it? And how long will it last? Great question. My tips for saving wine are very simple. Put the cork back on it or the screw cap, whatever was on top of it before, and stick it in the fridge. Unless it's a sparkling wine, in which case you do need a sparkling wine closure. This is because of the pressure inside the bottle. Remember when we had the sparkling wine to start, there was a cage over the cork to prevent it from blowing up. So if you have some left, you can save it. Don't dump that. You can save it. Just get yourself a sparkling wine closure. You can get them on Amazon for under $10. But it closes over the little lip. It kind of acts like the cage. So it prevents the cork from popping back out. But in terms of how long, and yes, you should put it in the fridge, even if it's a red wine too. It makes the wine last longer, trust me. Now, how long should you keep the wines for? Sparkling wine? I usually say upwards of about 3 days. And make sure that sparkling wine closure is used on that so you don't lose the bubbles. White and rosé wines, usually about 4 to 6 days. The lighter bodied ones last a little longer than the fuller bodied ones. Red wines, 3 to 5 days. Again, higher acidity levels or higher tannin levels can help it last a little longer. And fortified wines, which is a style of dessert wine, those are the ones that you can open and leave for 28 plus days. This is like the port and sherry. Those will all last quite a bit longer. Now, how do you know for sure, right? You're like, okay, it's 3 to 5 days. How do I know 3, 4, or 5? Just taste the wine. It's not bad for you. It just might not taste good. So that'll tell you if it tastes good, you're still good. If not, maybe it's time to toss that wine. Now, if you want the wine to last a little longer than this, try a repour wine saver. These are one of my favorite little wine gadgets. Super simple to use. They look like a cork, but inside they have this little mechanism that uses chemistry and science that when you pull the aluminum foil off the bottom, or maybe I'll just call it foil. I don't know if it's aluminum. Pull the foil off the bottom and stick it on the bottle. It pulls oxygen out of the bottle and it makes your wine last longer because oxygen is our enemy when we're trying to save wine. Okay, I think we're on to our last 3 questions. What food should I pair with this wine? Now, this question is an episode in and of itself, and I actually have one. So I'll just say 2 things. 1, go listen to my previous episode titled Wine and Food Pairing 101, my simple 2-step signature process that'll tell you everything you want. Now, of course, when you ask this during a private tasting, I will just tell you right there, based off the wine you have, what food you should pair with it. But obviously, now you're just listening to the podcast and I have no idea what wine you have in front of you. So go listen to that podcast. Otherwise, experiment for yourself. Everyone's tastes are so different. I learned this like at every wine and food pairing class that I teach. I teach like the basics and what the experts say, but then everybody has different opinions about what pairing they like best. So it's good to know what you like and what pairs well. So when you're experimenting, grab some different food once you have a new wine and grab some different food to snack on. Pay attention to what works and what doesn't, and just jot some note down. Something like, oh, this Chilean Cabernet that I tried went really well with the aged cheddar, but not the brie cheese. It kind of overpowered it. Or maybe you're trying an Australian Riesling and you happen to have some flaming hot Cheetos at home. And you might write, oh, this seemed like a really refreshing partner. It didn't go with strawberries, though, that I had in the fridge. Suddenly the wine had no flavor afterwards. Just jot those things down and you'll start to figure it out for yourself. All right, another question. Now, these last two questions are more like personal questions that people ask me. And so I've been asked, is there a wine you don't like? Now, I think the better way to phrase this question for me is there a wine you haven't quite figured out yet? Because I believe there's a version of every wine out there that I would like. And I think that's true for nearly everybody. And especially if we're talking varietals. A lot of times people will end up saying like, oh, I don't like Chardonnay, or I don't like, I don't know, insert varietal here, Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or whatnot. But the thing is that there are so many different versions of each of those varietals that it's pretty unfair to say that you don't like it just in general and to completely, leave that varietal behind. It's so dependent on the region it's made, the person making it, and the style they make it in. So, for example, I'm not a huge fan of Grenache, but I've lately had some really delicious Grenache heavy blends out of California that I'm loving. So I wouldn't be able to say I don't like Grenache because I like these wines. Also, the latest wine that I've actually been avoiding that I haven't quite figured out yet, Gewürztraminer. I hate to say it, but Mr. Cork and Fizz and I opened a bottle the other night from Alsace, and it was like a Grand Cru. So it's this high-end Gewürztraminer, and I had like a couple bottles of it. I found it on, I think it was one of the last bottle or wine spies. If you want to buy like great wines at a good price, check out Last Bottle or Wine Spies. Message me, and I have a special little code I can give you so you can get some money off on them. But anyway, this is not a great review for them because I didn't like this wine, but some people really love it. For us, it felt like drinking perfume. It was so aromatic, but some people really love that. For us, it was just too floral. So while that memory is fresh in my mind, I might not be reaching for a Gewürztraminer at the moment. That said, if a winery tells me they have a great Gewürztraminer, I'm going to try it. Like, I'm not going to give up on that wine just yet. Now, for our final question, this is on the flip side of the last one. What's your favorite wine? And I'll say what every wine enthusiast says, that is always changing. So I'll tell you my favorite at the moment. So if you're listening to this podcast as this goes out, or I guess just when I'm recording this, at the moment, my favorite wine are white Rhone blends. These are wines made from Marsanne, Viognier, Grenache Blanc, and also Roussanne, and also some Picpoul in there. They're just rich but bright and super textural and very aromatic. They are my favorite at the moment. All right, that's it. Those are my top 10 questions that I get asked during wine tastings. Did I miss a question that you were hoping I'd answer? Let me know. Message me on Instagram at Cork and Fizz or send me an email, haley@corkandfizz.com. And of course, I mean, this wasn't meant to be an ad by any means, but if a private tasting with me sounds like fun, you can book one for yourself on my website. I offer them in person for folks that are within an hour or so drive of the Seattle area and virtually no matter where you are. So you can head to www.corkandfizz.com and select private tastings from the menu. I have more information there, or just message me. Happy to answer any questions that you have. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd so appreciate if you could take a quick second, rate it, and leave a review and share it with a friend. It would absolutely mean the world to me. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I release new episodes every Wednesday. In next week's episode, I'll be interviewing Kim Chalmers. She's a managing director of her family's vine, grape, and wine business in Victoria, Australia. Her family is responsible for bringing in over 50 Italian grape varieties into Australia. How freaking cool is that? Including the now very popular in Australia, Nero de Avola. She talks about what it's like importing these grape varieties and what's coming next for them. Thanks again for listening, and as a thank you, I'd like to share my free shopping guide, 15 Wines Under $15. Simply head to my website, corkandviz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and join the list. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, but you want to come taste wine live with me, but you don't want to plan a private tasting, come join my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew, and join a community of amazing fellow wine lovers and drink wine with me. It's called The Cork Crew. You can head to corkandviz.com/free class pass to get a free pass to join so you can try it out. No cost. I don't ask for a credit card or anything. You can just see what you like. All right. Have a good one. Cheers.